Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Ask the Pastor, where you send me your questions and I do my best to respond to them. In today's episode, we have a question about Romans 3:25. And let me just read the passage for you real quick from my iPad. Apple, I hope you sponsor this episode for me. It says here, "This was to show God's righteousness because in his divine forbearance he passed over former sins." And the question is, can you explain what it means to pass over former sins? Here's what I think the question is getting at, and I think it's an important question to consider. When the Bible refers to God passing over sins or passing over former sins, does that mean that God is being unjust? In other words, if we look at the cross as the biggest event in history, and we have people on this side, the Old Testament people of God, we'll call them, and they sin just like we do. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Now, did God pass over their sins, meaning that those sins weren't guilty of punishment, that God just kind of a wink of an eye would sweep those sins under the rug? I think if we interpret to pass over sins, meaning that God doesn't do anything about them, really calls into question God's justice. Now, I know my questioner's not doing that, but if we assume that pass over former sins means that God doesn't do anything with them, then we are calling God's justice into question. What Paul is communicating here, and I think what we can take away from that, is that those former sins are ultimately punished. Now, God passes over them in the sense that if each and every sin or disobedience is worthy of death, for the wages of sin is death, God doesn't mete out this punishment in the moment that somebody commits the sin right here. And for the person that is trusting that God will provide atonement for sins, that God will provide a Messiah, somebody that will ultimately pay for those sins, God does punish this person's sin, not by ending their life, but through the Messiah, through Jesus. So we can call God passing over former sins as a forbearance, that the punishment that those sins deserve, committed by Old Testament saints, Old Testament believers, those sins did not receive the full punishment that they deserved in the moment. That punishment was meted out on Jesus. So they are believing in a Messiah in the future and trusting in that. That is the basis for their faith, and that God would one day reconcile his people to himself through a Messiah. And that Messiah receives the punishment for their sins, as well as the punishment for our sins. We trust in Jesus. Our sins are put on Christ as well. He paid for them on the cross too. So God is righteous. God is just. He is holy. He does not wink at sin. He does not sweep it under the rug. He deals with it. And the grace of the gospel is that the punishment that we deserve is put upon Jesus. That is the good news of the gospel. So, did God pass over former sins? In a way, yes. He did not punish the sins that these Old Testament saints deserved in the moment. Rather, his righteousness was shown at the cross of Jesus, where love and justice meet. Well, I hope that was helpful for you. If you have any more questions, you can send them to jc@hopecc.church. Please share this with your friends. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Leave us a like. Do all those things that YouTubers that are better than I am ask you to do. Thanks so much for watching. Hope to see you next time.